This is something, if you're coming from the applied stream, this is something brand new. And it's something that even the academic students may have difficulty with. So this is kind of where we're getting into the newish stuff. So what we want to do is we want to factor trinomials with a leading coefficient that is not 1. So we've done the simple ones, which are fairly easy. And in simple trinomials, the sum will always add up to b. The product will always add up to c. Now, in a tricky trinomial, you will have, even if you common factor, you'll have some sort of a value that's not equal to 1. Now, the sum here will always be b, so that stays the same. The product now, you'll have to find two numbers that multiply to a times c. So you take whatever number is out in the front, you multiply it with c, and that's the number that you have to figure out. Now, if you look here, it's really what simple trinomials are, because when it's simple, there's a 1 out here. So your product is just 1 times c, which gives you c. So really, you've been doing that. Now we have to do the tricky trinomials where we multiply these two numbers to figure out what it has to multiply to. So when do we use decomposition? This is what it's called. The number in front of x squared term is greater than 1. Okay, and it says here common factoring has already been tried and it's not an option. You just did 3 examples, hopefully you got to, where there was a number out in front of x squared. Well, in those examples, it all divided out evenly, so you still got 1 in front of a. We're going to look at options where you can't common factor. So here's an example of 1. 2x squared minus 5x plus 3. You can't common factor any number out of that. That 2 has to stay there. So it says here, I'm going to create a product sum chart. I find two numbers that multiply to what? 6. Two numbers that multiply to 6, or instead of writing here, I'm going to write product. My product has to equal 6. My sum has to equal what? -5. So this part still is the same. One extra step, 2 times 3, that's where I get this 6 from. Okay, so what are my two numbers here? Nick? -3, -2. So that's my pair, -3, -2. Now, to decompose, I'm going to write this in a special way. I'm breaking up this middle term. Okay? So instead of writing -5, I'm going to break it up into my 2, my magic combination here. So what I'll have is 2x squared stays the same. I take my magic combination that worked, minus, I'm going to do it this way, minus 2x minus 3x, and I'm still going to write plus 3. Okay, look at that and ask me any questions. Nathan? No. No. There's a reason why I chose to do it, and I'm going to go into it for the next part. Okay, so I just decomposed. I took these numbers here and I wrote them. Because if I simplify this, -2 minus 3 gives me -5. So I haven't changed it. I just made it a little bit longer. Now I have 4 terms. From your quiz, what can I do with 4 terms? Nathan? I can do factor by grouping. So there's a reason why, Jenny, I decided to put the 2's together and the 3's together. Okay, because it makes my life easier when I do factor by grouping. Now, I look at the first 2 terms. Here, What can I common factor out of those first two terms? Jenny? 2x, beautiful. So I write 2x there, and what will I have left over? Austin? X minus 1. I look at my last two here. What can I common factor out of those last two terms, Rob? Pardon? Good. I love that you said negative 3. Typically, when there's a negative sign in this term, you want to factor it out. So, Rob, when I factor out that negative 3, what am I left with? X minus 1. Okay, look at that step and ask me any questions that you have. Do you have a question? How many times does it go into? It figures out this part here, the 2x. What's left is when you divide, which is remaining in the brackets. I don't know if that answers. We'll do a couple more examples, see how that goes. Now, I'm not done here. What can I do? My final answer should be two binomials. What's common in this step? X minus 1 is common, so I can factor this out. So I'm going to write that as x minus 1. What will I have left over when I factor that out, Austin? 2x minus 3. So this involves every type of factoring that we've done. Common factoring, factoring by grouping, product sum to get this. This is all encompassing. And you'll always get two binomials. And again, if you do factoring, or FOIL, if you expand that, you will get 2x squared minus 5x plus 3. Does anyone have any questions about this? Okay, let's try another example. So I have to find two numbers. My product will be what? Two numbers that multiply to 12. How'd you get 12, Zach? 4 times 3. And it has to add to what? 8. Well, then there's 4 steps instead of 1. Because there's a number out in front. Well, this 4 doesn't divide into 3, so you can't common factor out. That's how you'll know. Yes. Okay, what was the question? Okay. Okay. All right, what combination will I use here? What combination? Danaram? 6 and 2 are my numbers. 6 times 2 gives me 12. 6 plus 2 gives me 8. Okay, so I keep my first term the same, 4t squared. I decompose this middle term into the pair that works. So what will I write that as? Okay, now which one does it make sense to place together? Which one will I write first, the 6 or the 2? Does it really matter? No, but there's a more logical answer. If I look at 4, I could put the 6 or the 2 there. Which one should I put? I'd probably put the 2. Because 2 is a factor of 4. Okay, so I'm going to write this as plus 2t plus 6t, and then I keep this as plus 3. So if I look, I'm kind of matching. The 6 and the 3 go together because I can divide 3 by 6. The 2 and the 4 go together because I can divide 2 by 4. Anyone have any questions with that? Okay, now I can common factor. I do a factor by grouping. So what can I common factor out of this first pair here? What can I common factor out? Thank you. 2t. So I'm left with what? 2t plus 1. And in that next part, so that's factoring by grouping, that next part, what am I left with? Or what can I common factor out of 6t and positive 3? Austin? I can factor out a positive 3. So Austin, what am I left with? When you common factor, when you do the common factor or the factoring by grouping, you should always have a binomial that's the same. That's how you'll know if you're correct. So now I do my last step, which is I factor out this binomial. 2t plus 1, 2t plus 1. There will always be a binomial at the end, yes. So what do I still have to write? Krissa? Excellent. Okay, any questions with this one? Okay, let's try another example. I have to now find two numbers that multiply to what? A product of what? With someone who I haven't heard from today. Jenny? Okay, negative 18. Because again, I'm doing 6 times negative 3. And it has to add to what? Someone who I haven't heard from. What does it have to add to? Vanessa? Yeah. Okay, what two numbers multiply to negative 18 and add to 7? Nick? 9 and negative 2. 9 times negative 2 gives me negative 18. Good. 9 plus negative 2 gives me 7. Okay, what will I write on my next line here? What will I write on the next line? Jenny? Plus 9 what? Good. Good. Okay, I have 4 terms now. Now I do factor by grouping. So I look at these first two. What can I common factor out of the first 2 terms? Rob? I can common factor 3m. So what am I left with, Rob? 2m plus 3. What do I do for that second one? What do I do to that second one? What would they're not the same. I have 2m plus 3. Here I have negative 2 minus 3. What do I do there, Rob? Good. I factor out a negative 1, so I'm left with 2m plus 3. When you factor out a negative 1, the signs change. Okay? And what will I get for a final answer here? What will I get? Jenny? 3m minus 1. Very good. Okay, I want you to try this one out on your desks. Okay, I'm going to take this up and see how you did. So, I have to find two numbers that multiply to what? What is my product here? Two numbers that multiply to negative 12 and add to, gentlemen, not 3, 1. Ben, two numbers that multiply to negative 12 and add to 1. What are they? It doesn't equal 1. Okay, one of them has to be negative. Yes, because when I do negative 3 plus 4, how many of you were at least able to get that combination? Okay, good. So I keep my first term the same, 6m squared. I decompose this middle term here. When I decompose it, I have to include whatever the variable is here. So I should write this negative 3mn plus 4mn. My last term stays the same. How many of you had this step written out? Okay, now I only look two at a time. So I'm going to look at these two. I can common factor out a number, which is 3. I can factor out a variable, which is m. So I'm left with 3m. When I factor that out, I'll be left with 2m minus n. Anyone have any questions about how I got that first part? Okay, the next one here, I can common factor out. What can I common factor out of those last two terms? What can I common factor out of those last two terms? 2n, so positive 2n. So I'll have what's left over is 2m minus n. So again, I should always have that common binomial. That's kind of your check of whether or not you're doing this correctly. Then when you factor out the binomial, you're left with 3m plus 2 times 2m minus n. How many of you were able to get that answer? If it's flipped, that's fine. It means the same thing. Okay, we're going to do two more examples. Again, your first step should always be, can I common factor? So, what can I common factor? Okay, I have 3x squared minus 6x minus 45. Can I common factor anything out of this? Jenny? Okay, if I common factor a 3 out, what am I left with? What am I left with here? What do you get for that? Okay, so look at how easy that is. If you can common factor first, now this becomes a simple trinomial instead of a complex one. If you didn't common factor out first, you would have to find two numbers that multiply to what? 135 and add to negative 6. Those are really big numbers. And you can do it. It'll take you a little bit longer, right? Whereas this one's a little bit easier. I have to find two numbers that multiply to negative 15 and add to negative 2. What two numbers are those? Thank you. Positive 3, negative 5. So I would just write here 3 bracket x plus 3, x minus 5. So does that one actually involve decomposition? No. If I do this next one here, can I common factor first? What can I common factor out? Can someone tell me? What do you get? Austin? Okay, so what am I left with, Austin, when I common factor out of 4? Figure it out. Mm-hmm. Okay, so again, I had a complex trinomial. Sometimes it doesn't always work out that way, but I can common factor out that 4. So now it becomes I find two numbers that multiply to negative 40 and add to negative 3. What two numbers multiply to 40 and add to negative 3? What two numbers? Very good. Negative 8 times positive 5. So I would just write this as 4 bracket x minus 8 x plus 5. Ooh, what am I missing there? What did I forget? Do you see something wrong that I did? I forgot the y's. I need y's at the end. It gets rid of that when you factor. Okay.